Yes.
Thank you, sir. We're going to just move on.
Just a moment.
Sorry.
Let Mr. Wetherell get set.
Apologies. We're going to move on to the October 1983 council meeting. First of all, if we could look at the minutes, HSOC 001 9923 _ 006, please. Thank you. And if we turn to the second page, we can see at the bottom there's a report of the morning session on AIDS. And it records that the chairman reported that Professor Bloom had given a most helpful introduction to AIDS, outlining its background and the present situation in the United Kingdom. Those present were unanimous in their appreciation to Professor Bloom, Dr. Ritzer and Dr. Arenstam for a most useful and informative session, which had helped to allay many fears created by the media. You've addressed this meeting in your witness statement, and so that everybody is looking at the same thing, I'd like to put that paragraph up. It's WITN 3912 001, please, Shumik. And it's paragraph 34. Page 12 on the internal page. As we can see, you say, I can't recall the exact content of Professor Bloom's speech, which was referred to in the Executive Committee meeting on the 8th of October 1983, but it was intended to reassure those present about AIDS transmission in the UK. At the time, I think there was a feeling that we were in a state of denial. Damage had been done and we didn't want to face it. It would also have meant many people having to abandon their treatment programmes. I think a couple of people walked out of the meeting in response to the downplaying of the issue, but he was not challenged on any of the points he made. Can we take that paragraph in stages? You say you can't recall the exact content of the speech. Do you have any recollection of what was said?
The difficulty here is that Professor Bloom was addressing the meeting, and I'm pretty sure he was addressing the meeting from prepared notes, because that had been his practice at the previous meeting that he'd addressed. That was certainly the case because the transcript came out in the bulletin. All I can do is think back to that meeting and sort of visualise sort of the way it was dealt with by Professor Bloom. I think by then there was a feeling within the Haemophilia Society membership that the penny had pretty well dropped, that there was an issue here in relation to AIDS and the haemophiliac community. People had weighed up these risk factors for themselves, and the evidence was starting to appear, certainly after the recorded death of 2 people, I think, at that time, Bristol and Cardiff. And Professor Bloom touched upon a number of points in relation to treatment and sexual activity. For the very first time, we were getting sort of intimations from Professor Bloom that treatment should be limited. In stark contrast to the previous stated position to meeting of the Haemophilia Society membership in relation to home therapy. The whole point about home therapy was that people would be able to make use of prophylactic treatment programmes and would be able to have more or less normal lives in line with the sort of Peter Jones approach in Newcastle, which I think we had aspired to, had funds permitted, I suppose. But by September, I think there was a feeling that all was not well. And this terrible crisis was emerging in people's minds. It may not have been explicitly stated, but there was certainly a feeling in the air that things were not good, that we were heading really for some sort of crisis, but it was difficult to quantify exactly what that crisis was going to be. And he made references to sort of minimising the need for treatment and the risks of sexual transmission were starting to come into it. And that was very distressing, I think, particularly for the parents of, young boys, teenage boys who under prophylactic arrangements had been able to, kick a ball around with their mates. And the possibility of, in relation to sexual transmission issues, the fact that you may not enjoy a normal sex life. I mean, that was starting now to come into the reckoning in a way. And the awful possibility that the damage had been done. That somehow or other, the Grim Reaper was lurking in the room. I'm sorry to use that sort of language, but that was really the feeling I think that was starting to emerge. And I sensed that that feeling also was starting to become a factor in people's thinking in the executive committee and the membership at large, I think. And then the next question, of course, was what's to be done? What's to be done?
Well, before we get there, can I just unpick a little bit more of this part of your statement? You've said that you think a couple of people walked out of the meeting in response to the downplaying of the issue. Did you talk to any of those people who left the meeting to
No, they left pretty quickly. A couple of people just disappeared completely. They didn't hang around. They left. Now, I can't remember at what point in Professor Bloom's speech they decided to up and leave. I honestly can't remember what prompted them to take such sort of precipitate action. But there were lots of different issues at stake in people's minds. I mean, you had, for example, our friend from Cambridge, she was obviously concerned about her son. And other people clearly would have been concerned about their partners, their wives. I know Professor Bloom tried to give some sort of reassurances about sexual transmission. It was unlikely that women could contract it. But I mean, frankly, some eyebrows went up around the room, I think, at that point. It was now there as an issue for members to reflect upon. And this terrible crisis of treatment and the risks associated with treatment, the existing risks, the historic risks, and future risks. I think all these were starting to become issues. But then, if the damage has been done, what next? Do you abandon treatment and all the consequences of uncontrolled bleeds? The imminent risk? Or do you carry on having your treatment with the prospect of risk becoming a reality in the future? Terrifically difficult questions to grapple with.
When you say that you think that they walked out in response to the downplaying of the issue, can you help us with what you mean by that?
Downplaying?
Yes.
What the word downplaying means there?
Well, what was your sense that he was downplaying?
Well, he was basically still saying, yeah, there is potentially a risk here now, hence less treatment. Careful in the way that you conduct your sex lives. So that's. But nonetheless, I suppose it's true at that time we didn't have a huge amount of evidence in terms of the fatalities, the suffering and the fatalities that were to come. It was still very much, I suppose, I've used the phrase in my statement earlier on about it being a bit of an abstract concept. But now we were beginning to see real sort of physical evidence of this, seemingly. And I think Professor Bloom was still basically saying, look, it may not be as bad, but it could be bad, In other words, he was pretty much holding to his position in relation to, I think, the treatment therapy programs going forward. That's my recall, I think, but without any minutes of that meeting or without having the transcript of his talk, it's difficult to be exact in my recall. It's an impression.
And when you talk about we were in a state of denial, was that members generally or the executive committee particularly?
I think we all were. I think the members of the executive committee certainly were not discussing this in any open sense, but you could kind of tell by the looks in people's eyes. What can you do? What can you say?
And were you aware at the time of being in that sense of denial, or is this something you've come to in hindsight?
No, I think it was definitely there as a feeling that we've got to go on having our treatment. And I think the next question was, what's to be done? I mean, remember the whole sort of raison d'etre really was to improve treatment programs. This is what the Haemophilia Society was there to do. It provided fellowship and it also encouraged research into treatment and improving the lives of haemophiliacs. And we've come thus far. Enormous strides have been made in recent years about treatment. We've moved on from cryoprecipitate to blood products. Prior to that, it had been blood transfusions. And the evidence of the inadequacy of that treatment was very obvious in older members who had, serious physical disabilities, awful arthritis in their joints. And we seem to have moved on from that time, and we were now in this period where with blood products, home therapy, prophylactic treatment, this whole new world of treatment was coming into being. where people would be able to have normal lives, be able to go to work, be able to look after their families, pay the rent, the mortgage, so on. And we didn't want, I don't think we wanted to roll back on that. We didn't want to go back to being in a state of pretty much permanent dependency on treatment programs that were very kind of hit and miss, some people. So that's really, I think, where we were. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe other people took a different view, but that's certainly how I kind of felt about it at the time. And I don't know if I'd feel any differently about it today. It's, with hindsight, things could have been probably better managed. And certainly, if reforms had been made in the way that blood products were manufactured, had we possibly achieved self-sufficiency in the UK sooner, then things may have been different. But here we are.
Can I go back to the minutes of the October council meeting with the report of the morning session?
Yeah.
HSOC 0019923. Sorry, HSOC 0019923_006. And it was page 2, Shumik. Thank you.
Yeah.
At the bottom. We don't get any sense here of any of that grappling
No, you don't.
with the difficulties.
I absolutely agree. This is what I'm saying, that we didn't have the ability, seemingly, to explicitly discuss, I think, how we were feeling about it as individuals. Well, I didn't anyway. That's all I can say.
Let's move forwards then to December 1983. HSOC 00294766_031, please, Shumik. And if we go to the second page, we can see under the heading, while there were no new suspected cases, it was noted that the Cardiff case was now confirmed.
Yeah.
And the letter from the Mail on Sunday to Paisners was tabled.
Yeah, Mail on Sunday.
In relation to the Cardiff case now being confirmed, what were the Executive Committee told about this?
We were once again not given any actual details of the identity of the individual or his circumstances, but once again, of course, we did note that it was within Professor Bloom's area. Quietly noted, I think.
In what way? What do you mean by that?
Well, I think we all knew that was Professor Bloom's area.
And did that raise any particular concerns or discussion amongst the committee?
No, it didn't. I mean, it does say, Professor Bloom was still, so far as I was aware at the time anyway, the chairman of the medical advisory panel. A panel upon whom, we relied pretty much exclusively, along with the centre directors that we are all attached to in our centres.
So were any questions raised by the Executive Committee about the advice that had previously been given by Professor Bloom in light of this new information?
Not that I can recall.
You said just a moment ago that it was quietly noted.
Well, it was not.
Were there other
not
discussions in the
spoken.
background?
It was not spoken. It wasn't said, oh, that's in Professor Bloom's neck of the woods. It wasn't said because we all realised that he was in Professor Bloom's area of responsibility.
From the minute, it might appear that the fact was noted, but the meeting then moved on. Would that be a fair assessment of what had happened in the meeting, or was there more substantial discussion about this?
I don't recall there being a further discussion. I think the minute is a pretty accurate summary of how matters were left.
Can we then move to the March 1984 meeting, HSOC 002 9476 _ 034, please? Again, second page, please, Shumik. As I said, this is the March committee meeting, and we can see at the top of the page here a discussion about the Mail on Sunday article and the Society's response to it. There's no mention of a further Haemofact being prepared in the minutes. Do you recall any discussion at this meeting of any Haemofact being prepared?
No, sorry, I don't.
And if we go to that Haemofact, it's PRSE 000 1094. We can see it was produced on the 11th of May 1984, and it's, if we go to the next page, Shumik, please, it's been written by Christine Lee.
Yes, that's right.
In which she provides an update. The occurrence of acquired immunodeficiency syndrome AIDS is in haemophiliac patients has strongly suggested transmission of the order by blood products, and epidemiological studies have suggested it may be related to a transmissible agent, and
yes.
It carries on. Again, was the executive committee aware that a Haemofact would be sent out in May 1984?
I don't remember. I mean, the Haemofact series, of course, had been launched, if that's the right word, by Professor Bloom's statement incorporated in the Reverend Tanner's letter of the 4th of May. I think it's true to say that that was, in a sense, the first Haemofact. All the numbers follow on from that being number 1. As I said to you earlier, we didn't have an editorial board. The editor was Clive Knight, and I think the Reverend Tanner also had an editorial function. I think he cleared Haemofacts. Clive would prepare them, and the Reverend Tanner would clear them for publication. And that was really, I think, how it was left.
And so, is it right that for each of the Haemofacts, the executive committee had no involvement in whether they were circulated, first of all?
Well, as I said earlier on, the Haemofact series was launched specifically to try and deal with the issue of AIDS. It had been intended that the content was put together by Clive Knight with the Reverend Tanner, and that the content would be informed by expert medical opinion, which is why we had Arthur Bloom in on the first one. I mean, Dr. Lee, I did this one. In fact, it's her text. I really think I have to say this. We were relying the entire time on what we thought was expert advice from received authorities in the field of haemophilia. And the content, so far as I can recall, the content of Haemofact was left for the editor and the chairman to make a determination on its suitability or appropriateness at the time. There's a genuine desire, I think, and that was endorsed by the executive committee, to try and keep people informed as far as it was possible to provide them with expert information.
And when, for example, Dr. Lee had written something for a Haemofact, or Professor Bloom had, are you aware of whether it went to any other clinicians to check that this was the received view rather than just one individual clinician's view?
Well, we had the medical advisory panel, and in my experience with panels met.
Can we come to the panel in a moment?
Yeah.
I certainly want to address that with you, but can we just stay focused at the moment on the Haemofacts?
Yeah.
Are you aware of whether they were ever circulated to anybody else, or whether it was a case of one doctor wrote it and, as you say, the chairman and the editor checked them and out they went? Was there any medical checking of them?
I don't believe so. I can't recall if the text was circulated to other clinicians. My answer is I don't know.
We've seen within the inquiry a litigation report that Professor Bloom wrote subsequently, in which he talked about the Haemofacts. Perhaps we can put the relevant page up on the screen. It's DHSC 0001297 _177 is the relevant page. DHSC 0001297 _177. DHSC 0001297, and it's page 177. Thank you. It's the top of the page. This part of the report from Professor Bloom says that from 1983, the Haemophilia Society circulated their members and haemophilia centres with a series of pamphlets on AIDS called Haemofact, which contained relevant information and advice. These pamphlets were produced by the Society, but not with input from the Medical Advisory Panel. I have no firm knowledge of the source of factual information needed to prepare the pamphlets. And then it carries on. What was your understanding of the position?
Well, I note what's said there, and I doesn't accord with my understanding at the time of what the situation was in relation to the Haemofact series. Professor Bloom was the chairman of the medical advisory panel. I think Dr. Tuddenham was a member of the advisory panel. The names of the members of the advisory panel were published every year in the annual report.
But specifically in relation to the Haemophilia,
Yes.
your understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, was that the medical contents of them were produced where they're named by the named doctor.
Yes.
Including Professor Bloom in that very first letter.
Yes.
Just before we leave the Haemophilia, could we look at the 1984 annual report, HSOC 0019505? And if we can go to internal page 4 of it. Two further pages, please. Thank you. We can see towards the end of the page, the paragraph says that the Haemophilia proved to be a most effective means of passing accurate information to all members of the society immediately it became available. In this way, much unnecessary anxiety was alleviated. There's a focus in that paragraph on alleviating anxiety. Was that similarly the focus of the executive committee during the months when the Haemophilia was produced?
Yes.
To seek to alleviate anxiety?
It was to keep members informed, and in doing so, reduce the possibility of anxiety. I think another reason for the Haemophilia was to keep the pressure off the office so that people were not constantly ringing into the office for information. It's a very small office, and David Waters was a very busy coordinator. I think the decision to issue the Haemophilia series was actually to inform and try and reduce unnecessary anxiety. Yeah, that was the intention. It was an attempt to keep people informed.
With the benefit of hindsight, do you think that there was too great an emphasis on alleviating anxiety to the detriment of providing clear information?
What do you mean?
Was there too great a focus on alleviating anxiety, such that what you've described as the quiet noting or the concerns that members had
Yes.
were not adequately expressed in the publications?
No, I'm afraid the intention was to inform people and give them what appeared to be expert advice about how the AIDS crisis was developing in relation to the haemophiliac community. We had no other way, really, of communicating what we took to be expert opinion about the state of play at any given point in time during that period. I hope that answers your question, because I really can't think of any other way of answering it.
Let me pick up on the medical advisory panel and let's explore that together a little bit more. At the time that you were on the executive committee, what was your understanding of how the panel operated?
Well, I assumed, and there's the word, I assumed that the panel was a reference tool for the Haemophilia Society. The Reverend Tanner did refer to the medical advisory panel as our medical advisory panel. Now, it was our panel in the sense we didn't own it, we didn't pay for it, we didn't commission the members of the medical advisory panel in any sort of sense, but I was, I suppose, innocently under the impression that there was this body of expert opinion that could be called upon to provide us with expert advice. And the people listed, in the annual report that I mentioned earlier on, were all senior clinicians in their field, leading practitioners, and actually people for whom, we had a great deal of admiration and respect. They attended our meetings, they gave speeches that were intended to be understandable by the layperson, and throughout this time I had, faith in the advice that they appeared to be giving us, or indeed were giving us. And to whom else would we go other than our medical advisory panel and the centre directors and the clinicians with whom we had day-to-day dealings in the centres?
And was it that phrase, our advisory panel, that led you to believe that there were formal meetings and minutes?
Yeah.
Was it ever explicitly said that they met?
No. Well, we didn't get minutes of meetings, so I suppose there's the clue. But equally, you have to ask yourself, how useful would minutes of very, very technical meetings be useful to the layperson? I think I've got to say something else about this, because I know it's hard now in 2021, with technology and information being generally available, the ability to research information wasn't possible in 1983-84. We were, in many ways, I think, a deferential community. I, for one, would never dream of challenging a haematologist, other than where I felt there was an occasion when I had to ask difficult questions of our local centre director, but on the whole I would not have had the temerity to question advice and information that we're receiving from these very, very illustrious people in their field. After all, I'm not a scientist, not a doctor. My only brush with science is O-level physics. So I've ever felt in a position to challenge what appeared to be very, very sound advice from an entirely reputable source. And I'd be very surprised if other members of the executive committee took a different view. As I say, I think we're a very deferential and grateful little community. And we trusted people to give us the best advice possible at the time.
And in that context, with the benefit of hindsight, do you think the committee was too trusting or too reliant?
Absolutely.
On them?
Yes, we were. We undoubtedly were. But what were we to do? What was the alternative? To whom would we go to get a counter position? And what would, if we'd done that collectively, what would that have done to the relationship we had with our medical advisory panel? A loss of confidence, and all that goes with it.
Was there any awareness on the committee of there being any other positions from different clinicians?
Well, I do remember Dr. telling me when all this was really starting to worry us, I think we had our concerns. He said that his son was going to refuse treatment and he was going to seek alternative therapies from a homeopathy or something, a herbalist. And I never did really ask him how his son got on with that. I suspect not terribly well.
But there wasn't any sense within the committee that there were other clinicians outside of the panel who were saying other things that perhaps that would suggest that the panel was only giving one view?
Well, I think I've got to say this, that I think there was a bit of a difference of approach between the centre directors in terms of treatment programmes, because it's certainly the case that we had Peter Jones in Newcastle that had the prophylactic programme running. And then we had other centre directors, and I'm thinking actually of our own in Cambridge, who took a much more, how can I put it, at the time I thought economical approach to treatment, for reasons that I never really explained, but the treating the bleed rather than anticipating the bleed, not having a prophylactic programme but responding to the event of the bleed, which I must say for some people was massively difficult. But I think, and I don't really understand the reasons for the different approach, because the centre directors did have their own meetings, they had their own committees, but I think they had discretion within their particular centres to provide the treatment that they felt was appropriate in relation to the needs of their patients. So there was always that overriding concern that clinical judgments were made by individual medical practitioners.
Now, you've spoken of the deferential nature of society at that time, and you've spoken about the medical advisory panel. In terms of the dynamics within the executive committee itself, was that another context where the committee tended to be deferential towards perhaps Reverend Tanner or Mr. Waters, or was it a context where there was lively discussion and debate about issues?
Well, I wouldn't say I ever felt deferential towards David. I mean, I regarded him very much as a brilliant guy working terrific hours, to keep us all going. I hoped he was more of a friend than someone I would be deferential to. But I must say I think Alan Tanner was a man who did command, sort of respect, and I did feel deferential towards him, because he was such a brilliant chairman and such a lovely bloke, and he was very, very energetic in our cause. And once again, he was a man of the cloth, and I had to respect that too. So, yeah, the word deferential, I suppose, is a slightly difficult word, but I had respect, immense amount of respect for him.
And again, with the benefit of hindsight, do you think that respect, deference, had an impact on how decisions were made within the committee?
Yeah, I think so. I think we did take a lead from... Well, I honestly, once again, I don't really there were people on the executive committee, very able people. I mean, Ken Milne, John Prothero, Mr. Abrams, Rosenblatt. They were very able, very intelligent, but I think also they too were relying on, I think, what we all thought was a good relationship between Professor Arthur Bloom and the Reverend Tanner and the medical advisory panel, these distinguished people that came to our general meetings. They didn't come to executive committee meetings. I don't think they were invited to do so, but they certainly came to the council meetings, the annual general meeting. And all that, I think, was coordinated, by the Reverend Tanner. And he had his very good connections. And as I say, he's a very charming man, very able man, highly intelligent. And of course his son had haemophilia. Yeah.
Before we move on to the Blood Products Subcommittee, which is the next substantive topic, I just want to tie off one point of the chronology, and that is that you weren't able to attend any of the meetings from after September 1984 until the 1985 Executive Committee in the March of 1985. You sent your apologies, it seems, for those meetings.
Yes, that was a very difficult period for me personally, which I don't want to go into.
I'm not asking why. I wanted to simply ask again about the mechanics of one's absence from such meetings. Again, did you have any involvement or any ability to participate in any of the decisions that were taken by the committee during that time?
No.
When we look at the Blood Products Subcommittee, you
Yeah.
weren't a member of that subcommittee.
No.
Can you help us with how people were chosen to be on it?
You mean, were they elected or appointed by the committee?
Exactly, or was it a case of putting oneself forward for subcommittees? The very practical point of who decided who was going to sit on these subcommittees.
Well, when I joined the executive committee and attended my first meeting on the 12th of May, the Reverend Tanner extended a general invitation to join any committee that one felt sort of able to contribute to. And there were existing committees, like, for example, the Blood Products Committee was already in existence. Ken Milne was the sort of leading light in that, and I think John Prothero and Howard Abrahams also were involved in that. And I don't know how they were appointed, because it was before my time. But I suspect an issue came up which required some expertise and some ability to present a position for the society, and a person would come forward who was able to discharge that responsibility.
Who decided what issues the subcommittee would consider? Was that something that the executive committee discussed and then sent the subcommittee to look at it? Or was it the subcommittee who decided things and then put that to the executive committee?
Well, the subcommittee would produce papers which would then be submitted to the executive committee. So, I mean, the case of the Blood Products Subcommittee, Ken Milne would be sort of charged with the responsibility of putting the paper together in accordance with the policy of the society. And then that paper would be submitted to the executive committee.
So the executive committee would charge the subcommittee to look at some particular point?
Yeah, I mean, it would be a standing remit to that particular committee to look after the question of blood products.
And do you know how the subcommittee obtained the information that they used? to decide on the policy that they would recommend? Where did they get their information from?
Right. Well, that would have probably been Ken Milne making approaches to the appropriate bodies. That wasn't monitored as such by the executive committee. That was really left for him within his remit to research and approach the appropriate bodies.
In your statement, you've indicated that in relation to some particular points, you're aware or you think that there were discussions with BPL about particular issues, and elsewhere in your statement you've said that the Society relied on the medical advice and opinions of the director of BPL.
Yes, I believe so.
Was the executive committee told what the advice and opinions were when those discussions happened?
I honestly can't recall the detail of discussion and reports. So long ago. The main thrust of the Society's policy, of course, had been for some time to achieve self-sufficiency in blood products. So that was pretty much understood as an ongoing requirement for the subcommittee to address. But I don't recall any detailed discussions or reports other than what is documented.
Could we turn up the minutes from the February 84 Executive Committee meeting, HSOC 0029476 underscore 033. Now, I should preface my question with being aware that you had given apologies to this meeting, so it may be that you can't help us. But on the second page, there's a heading, Blood Product Subcommittee, which tabled, and it's recorded that Mr. Milne's paper had been tabled. Sorry, I'll just let it come up. There we go. The heading is Blood Product Subcommittee.
I'll wait and see.
And his paper had been tabled and was introduced for discussion. In conclusion, it was agreed unanimously that until the situation became clearer in relation to blood supplies, it would be wise for the Society to wait and see. Again, aware that you weren't present at the meeting, did you have any discussions about this outside of the meetings?
No, but in my subsequent reading of these minutes, I think I just accepted when I read them that was the policy, and we were sticking with it for the time being. We hadn't got on at that stage to the question of heat treatment, had we? No, it's not mentioned here.
There's nothing referred to here.
No. So we were in that period when we still had this dreadful sort of dilemma, whether to treat or not to treat, to accept treatment or not accept treatment. And I think the wait and see was really kind of holding position.
Can I pick up the last part of this paragraph where it says it was agreed that copies of the discussion document should be circulated to members of the medical advisory panel for comment?
Yeah.
Just in terms of the sequence of events, it seems that the paper was agreed by the executive committee, the policy was agreed by the executive committee, and then it went to the medical advisory panel. Was that your understanding at the time?
I don't believe we would have endorsed it as a policy without some input from the medical advisory panel. because why would we refer it to the medical advisory panel if it was already done and dusted as a policy? I think that would have been so. In other words, the medical advisory panel should have had the opportunity, or would have had the opportunity to take a view on this.
It seems from the minutes of the next executive committee meeting in the March that then there was a discussion about the replies that had been received from the policy paper, rather than a paper being produced, it going to the medical advisory panel and then coming to the executive committee. It seems to have gone the opposite way round. Do you have any recollection of what was happening there?
No, I don't.
If we look at that March meeting, we've looked at it before, but we're going to look at a different part of it. HSOC 002946_034. Your name is not mentioned as someone who was either present or having received apologies, so I'm not sure whether you were there or not.
I would have been recorded if I'd been there. Now, as for the apologies, I did my best to get apologies to David, usually.
Not a criticism, just before I ask
but
questions.
Sometimes things cropped up in
Indeed.
my life that prevented me from getting to where I needed to be, perhaps. I don't remember why I wasn't there. It may have been, actually, looking at the date, it may have been because my second son had just been. Yeah. Okay, personal matter. Yeah.
If we just look at page 2, it's referenced there. Mr. Milne reported he'd received replies from Professor Bloom, Drs. Ritzer, Colvin, Forbes and Tuddenham. I'm very aware that you don't think you were there at that time, but do you recall ever being provided with copies of the replies from those doctors?
No.
And if we move on to the council meeting of September 1984, the reference, Shimmick, is HSOC 0019923_010. And if we could go to page 3, please. We can see a subheading Blood Products Subcommittee and a list of 5 items that were reported to the council.
Yeah.
Looking at that list of items, was that that list of things that the executive committee were already aware of the Blood Products Subcommittee having worked on, or when it was reported to the council, was this information new to you?
No, I think it was worked on by the Blood Products Subcommittee with the blessing of the Executive Committee. What you have, the report to the Council would certainly have been approved by the Executive Committee. I don't remember exactly how that was done, but at the Council meeting there was certainly no issue about what was presented. In other words, there was collective Executive Committee responsibility for what was presented to the Council at that particular time.
But how much did the Executive Committee know about what the subcommittee was doing and who they were talking to and how they were coming to their recommendations?
As I said earlier on, I really cannot recall any detailed discussion about Ken Milne's contacts. I only know that we did seek, or it was intended to seek, the comments of the medical advisory panel. Everything we did in relation to clinical practice, treatments, was a matter that was referred to the MAP, so far as I can recall. But only so far as I can recall. There would be no reason not to do so.
I want to move on to a different area, Mr. Wetherell, if I may. In each of the annual reports of the Society, there was published a list of gifts, grants and legacies.
Yeah.
And in each of them, or in very many of them, there is a note that there was a gift or a grant made by, for example, Armour or Cutter or Immuno. Do you recall any discussions at the Executive Committee about whether the Society should accept donations from pharmaceutical companies?
No. I believe we were grateful for any financial support we could get. But so far as I can recall, it was never on the basis that we would have an obligation to any pharmaceutical company as a result of receiving a donation or a contribution. And usually they were to meet specific costs.
Was there ever any discussion about why the companies might be funding things for the Society?
Well, it was an ethical issue.
Or about what the companies hope to achieve by funding those things?
What their motivation might have been for passing money our way?
Yes.
No.
And did you have any knowledge of the nature of the relationships that were maintained with the pharmaceutical companies? Who was meeting with them and what the context of those relationships were?
No.
Who primarily was dealing with the pharmaceutical companies? Do you recall?
I think there was correspondence generated probably by David Waters, and of course Ken Milne, Howard and John. They all had an interest in this issue of blood products, and so I think the Executive Committee pretty much left them to deal with it.
And that context and that interest was because of their work on the blood products subcommittee?
I believe so, yes. I mean, logically, that's what they would be interested in and pursuing.
If we have an example of that, Mr. Wetherell, which we'll bring up on the screen, HSOC 0029476 _039. They're the Executive Committee minutes of August 84, and again, I note you weren't present, but it may be that you can still assist us. If we turn to page 2, under the heading Blood Products Subcommittee, in A, there is reference to Mr. Milne not yet having met the Product Data Services Manager from BPL. Then B, Mr. Milne also reported that Barry Barber had moved from Cutter Laboratories to Alpha Therapeutics UK Limited. Why was that something that was relevant for the Executive Committee to know about?
Why was it relevant? I don't know. Obviously, Barry Barber was someone who was known to us, but I really can't remember the significance of him being mentioned. And in this context, I'm sorry, no, the name doesn't really mean anything to me.
And then in Part C, a brief discussion followed on the involvement of the pharmaceutical companies in the work of the Blood Products Subcommittee, and it was agreed that this should remain on an informal basis. Do you know what that's referring to?
No, I don't.
On the times you sat on the executive committee, was there any discussion that you recall about those relationships?
I can't recall any discussion about the informality of such a relationship.
So those are the questions I have for Mr. Wetherell. I'm aware that there are some questions from the recognised legal representatives that I need to have. I wonder whether now is time for a break for me to do that.
It's very nearly lunchtime.
It is.
So the sensible thing to do would be to take our lunch break now and come back at 5 to 2. So 5 to 2. Do you think that will give you long enough?
It will, thank you, sir.